Bill McKibben is an author, activist, and environmentalist. His book, The End of Nature, was the first book printed for a general audience about climate change and has been printed in 24 languages. He also founded 350.org, the first planet-wide grassroots climate change movement. McKibben is the Schumann Distinguished Scholar in Environmental Studies at Middlebury College and a Fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He was the 2013 winner of the Gandhi Prize and Thomas Merton Prize. Foreign Policy named him to its inaugural list of the world's 100 most important global thinkers, and he has been called America's most important environmentalist. Please welcome Bill McKibben. Well, Mr. McKibben, thank you so much for joining us today. You're giving a lecture tonight on the education of an unlikely activist. So what exactly is an unlikely activist?
Well, Greta, I started life as a writer, and that's really what I'm most comfortable doing. You know, like many writers, I'm a little introverted and like to keep to myself and type away in my room. But at a certain point, having written, as you said, the first book about climate change, I began to be astonished at the slow pace of change. The fact that the scientists had sounded a clear warning, our politicians were not producing anything in the way of results or action. And it occurred to me at a certain point that probably another book was not going to move the needle here, that what we needed was not more argument. We'd already won the argument. What we needed was some power to match up to the financial might of the fossil fuel industry. That people power is our only hope, since we're never going to outspend Exxon.
All right, so kind of what was your first steps as becoming an activist?
Well, we started 350.org 7 years ago now. And when I say we, I mean me and 7 undergraduates at Middlebury College in Vermont. We had no real idea what we were doing, which is probably good, since otherwise we might have been discouraged. We knew we needed to work globally, since climate change is the first truly global problem. We figured that it'd be difficult to work globally, mostly because people insist on speaking their own language all over the world. Hence the somewhat unusual name. 350 is the most important number in the world. It's the amount of carbon we could safely have in the atmosphere, measured in parts per million, a number, unfortunately, we're already well past. We're at about 400 parts per million now, which is why the Arctic and the Antarctic have commenced to melt, and it's why the ocean is acidifying, and so on. So it was an important number to get out there, but also we knew that it would be easier to work across those language barriers if we were using Arabic numerals, not words, you know. That 350 would mean the same thing wherever we happen to be, you know, in the Midwest or in the Mideast or wherever it was. And such has proven to be the case. Perhaps with beginner's luck or something, we think we've organized about 20,000 rallies and demonstrations in every country on earth except North Korea, and helped finally bring some serious attention and pressure to the most important problem that human beings have yet faced.
Okay.
Okay. Well, one of the questions I wanted to ask you about is the disproportionate representation in the media. I think there's a lot of, I mean, it's not really a two-sided issue, but it's given two sides, and the voice that's saying that climate change isn't caused by humans or isn't really a problem is equally as loud.
Right. So this has not been the finest hour for American journalism. And it's because we're kind of used to debates. It's easiest for journalists to sort of moderate debates. He said this, she said that. And in many cases, that's appropriate, because the debates that we're often having are about people's opinions about things. Should abortion be a right for women, or is it a violation of the rights of the fetus? I mean, I have my opinions on those things, but I understand that they're things about which people could have other strong views. The problem with climate change, and the reason the reporting has been such a fiasco, is that it's not really a debate like that. The science has been very clear, and the interesting debate is not, is this happening? It's what we should do about it. But as is often the case, journalists have too often taken the kind of easy way out and found the 2 or 3 scientists who are still willing to, like the same guys who think that cigarettes don't cause cancer and so on and so forth. That's not been very helpful. And it's beginning to really go away now, mostly because the evidence is so overwhelming and so obvious and dramatic to anyone taking a look at it. California, we're now in the 4th year of the worst drought that's ever been measured by far. There is no snowpack in the Sierra Nevadas. Sao Paulo, they became so desperate for water earlier this year, in the 5th or 6th biggest city in the world, that they were drilling through basements, through people's concrete in their basements, trying to find groundwater. We have people evacuating the islands where they've lived for thousands of years in the Pacific because the sea has risen too high. Mother Nature, in the end, is the best educator. I mean, 80% of American counties have had a federally declared disaster in the last couple of years. At a certain point, who are you going to believe? Fox News or your own lying eyes,
So in the past few years, have you seen a big change in people's attitudes towards climate change?
Yes. The polling data makes it clear that most Americans are concerned and understand it's a problem. The difficulty is that most of us feel too small to do anything about this huge problem. And in fact, that's a correct perception, I think. I mean, it's important that we make the changes as individuals that we can make. My house is covered with solar panels, and I drive an electric car, and I eat local food and whatever, but I don't try to fool myself that this is solving climate change. Climate change is a structural, systemic problem. It's rooted in the power of the fossil fuel industry to avoid having to pay for the chaos and damage that it's causing. And that means that the most important thing that an individual can do is not be an individual, is join together with other people to build the kind of movements that might change those power balances. That's why we started 350. If you have some time left over after doing the organizing we need to do, then by all means change your light bulb too.
What kind of things would you suggest to Congress or to, to an organization to kind of eliminate our?
Well, I mean, everybody knows, economists left, right, and center have said for 20 years that the most sensible, easy solution would be to put a price on carbon to reflect the damage it does in the atmosphere, and that would help move us away from. But Congress isn't, truthfully, not going to do that in the short run, because Congress is largely owned by the fossil fuel industry. They're the biggest contributors. The Koch brothers, who are the biggest, together the richest man on earth, are the 2 Koch brothers, an oil and gas fortune. They spend far more money on politics than anybody else. They're going to spend, they just announced $900 million on the next election. That's more than the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. Koch brothers, party of 2, and that means that we're probably not going to get the action we need in Congress right away. So instead, the rest of us have to, in a sense, become the equivalent of a carbon tax. We have to make life difficult for this industry. That's why people are opposing every new pipeline, coal mine, coal port, whatever, here and around the world. It's also why young people especially have risen up to lead this movement for divestment from fossil fuels. And so at churches and denominations like the United Church of Christ or the Unitarian Church, at major foundations, and at colleges and universities around the world, people have successfully demanded that these institutions begin divesting their portfolios, selling off their shares in coal and gas and oil. And institutions from Stanford to Stockholm to Sydney to Scotland to last week Syracuse University, which announced plans to divest its $1.2 billion endowment from fossil fuel. This is really important. This drive reached a kind of symbolic high point, I think, so far anyway, in September, on the same day that 400,000 people paraded through the streets of New York in the biggest demonstration about anything in this country in many years, this huge climate march. That evening, the Rockefeller family announced that they were divesting their philanthropic endowments from their holdings in coal and gas and oil. And if you think about that, what a significant symbolic moment. Here's the first family of fossil fuel, the original fossil fuel fortune. And they're saying it's no longer prudent nor moral for us to be invested in this. That was the kind of beginning of the end of the fossil fuel age. The question is how long that end will stretch out, how quickly we'll make the, by now, very possible transition to sun and wind and other renewable forms of energy. How long the fossil fuel industry will be able to keep its dead weight around our necks.
Nice.
So we see a lot of young people and college students focusing on things like recycling, and when we think of environmental issues, we think of recycling. But how do we get young people to focus on bigger issues like ocean destruction and the air and water quality?
Well, we find young people all over the world taking the lead on this, on climate in particular, and it's appropriate that they should do so. I mean, if you think about it, I'll be dead in 20 years, most likely, demographically, which means that I'll be gone before, the latter part of my life will be heavily colored by changes in the climate, but I will have gotten to spend most of it in a more or less normal climate system. Not true for you guys. Just as you hit the prime of your careers, the scientists tell us that this will be kicking in its fullest form. And instead of doing the things that you've been trained at a great university like this to do, you, like everybody else, will be dealing with a kind of ongoing series of emergency responses to crises that sap our economies and lead to all kinds of difficulty here and around the world, make the world a less secure place. So young people should, for practical reasons, take the lead in these fights in a lot of ways, and they are, and they should be clear that they bring great moral authority as they do so. Normally at a university, we operate on the assumption that it's old people telling things to young people. That's kind of the model, That's reasonable. That's sort of how theoretically we've learned something in the course of our long lives that we might be worth passing on. Okay. But in this case, when you stand with the Board of Trustees, you have far more moral authority in this area than they do, because you're going to have to deal with the effects of this. So it's, that's, as students in place after place have said to their trustees, time for you guys to divest, because it's our future you're talking about. Many places have done it. The ones that haven't, students have often gone on to the next step. As we talk at the moment, there are students at University of Mary Washington in Virginia, at Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania, at Bowdoin in Maine, who are occupying their president's offices and things, demanding action on climate change.
What about Harvard? I saw your piece in the Boston Globe.
Yes. Well, everybody's headed to Harvard next week for Focus on Harvard. Harvard will be the last college in America to divest from fossil fuels. They go very slowly about everything. I wrote a piece a couple weeks ago for Slate about the fact that it took Harvard 160 years to decide that it might be worth educating women, and there was a 60-year effort to make sure that gay students didn't enroll, and they didn't let Jews get married at the chapel 50 years ago, and so on and so forth. Harvard will be slow, but it's important to make the case there, just because they're the richest university in the world. They're investing billions of dollars in things that are damaging instead of in things that are useful. One of the ironies of all of this, of course, is that if Harvard and everybody else had taken the advice of students 2 and 3 years ago and sold their fossil fuel stocks, they'd be far better off financially than they are at the moment. They would have avoided the crash in coal shares and the rapid fall in the price of oil that's doing great damage.
Wow.
So above all, what can millennials and young people do?
Organize. Some of that you can do in the forums that you guys are particularly good at, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. But those things which are really important aren't an end to themselves. They need to be used to get people together in the real world to do real things. Some of those things are positive, to push hard for the adoption of solar energy, say, which should be ubiquitous. It's odd to come to a campus like this and not see solar panels everywhere, because that's how we should be powering the future. And some of it is negative. You need to be able to stand up to the power of the fossil fuel industry, because they're attempting to, well, they're very clear that they're willing to break the planet in pursuit of a few more years of the profits that they make. That's not okay. And that's what, I mean, if millennials want to stand up for this millennium that they are the ones kicking off, that's the most important work there could be, because if we don't get climate change under control very soon, it'll be the next 4 or 5 millennia that we feel the deep effects of these changes.
All right, well, Bill McKibben is an author, activist, and environmentalist. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks for tuning in to the special edition of Miami Television News. Make sure to go like us on Facebook and follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Miami TV News. I'm Greta Morris, and have a great week.